Now we move on to the session number 4, which continues with smartphone addiction. Smartphone addiction. Sir will be talking about the overview of management. I invite the speaker, Dr. Kshitij Srivastava, to kindly speak on the topic. And to be with him, I invite our chairpersons, Dr. Devashish Konar and Dr. N. Hiramani Singh. Dr. Devashish Konar, sir, he has been the director of Mental Health Care Center, Burdwan. He is also the vice president of ICAM, and he has conducted many seminars, workshops, and worked in national and international conferences that includes 2 papers in the World Congress of Psychiatry hosted by the World Psychiatry Association held in Madrid, Spain, and another paper at the Congress of International Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Allied Professions held at Durban, South Africa. To accompany him, I invite our own Dr. N. Hiramani Singh. Can I have his slide, please? Sir has been the professor, Sir is the professor, Department of Psychiatry, RIMS Imphal, and he is the ex-HOD of the same department. He has been the former vice president of Eastern Zone IPS and held various other positions. Sir has over 30 publications, and his interests are in geriatric psychiatry. He has many publications in international as well as national index journals. I welcome both the chairpersons. I request Dr. N. Hiramani, sir, to kindly introduce Dr. Kshitij. Sir, are you there? Can I request Devashish, sir? Devashish.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, sir.
It's pleasure to introduce Dr. Kshitij Srivastava, who is our Secretary General of organization, very active, dynamic secretary. And he is an associate professor in MLN Medical College, Allahabad. He is with many feathers. He has MD, DNB, MRC Psych, CCT in child psychiatry and whatnot. He speaks very lucidly and is a very well-learned man and a very humble person. I request him to take over and start the session. He has selected a difficult topic, which is actually at the crux of things, since he has selected treatment. We'll like to learn from him. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes. Over to Dr. Kshitij Srivastava, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. I'll just try to share my screen. Yes, just.
Which is actually at the since he has selected treatment. We'll like to learn him.
Noted. Kshitij sir, just click on the share screen button at the bottom of the Zoom window in the center.
Share screen.
After clicking on the share screen, you will get an option of entire screen.
Yes. Yes.
Correct, sir.
Can you see it now?
Yes, sir. So can
Yes.
you put it on the slideshow?
Yes.
Kshitij sir, just click on the share screen button at the bottom of the.
Everyone, thanks for a very kind introduction. Just a second. Yes. Yeah, I'm good. So I'll be focusing on smartphone addiction. I'll be doing an overview of management. We're going to go on specifics tomorrow in tomorrow's sessions. So I'll just give an overview of how we should proceed when we try to manage smartphone or any other behavior addiction. So it's not just smartphone, but any other behavior addiction. Okay. Yes. So before we go ahead, just revisit the meaning of word addiction. It literally means to be bound to or be enslaved by something. So essentially, addiction means that we are slave to that process. Yes. However, a lot of parents would think something opposite than this. So although we feel that addiction is something which makes you a slave, a lot of parents would think that it's all the fault of the child, the adolescent, that they are fickle, unpredictable, and they can really get rid of the addiction if they want to. This is not the case. So we have to try and deconstruct why a person gets addicted before we try to manage it. So this would be my scheme of management. So before we deconstruct, we have to understand the pre-existing vulnerability to addictions, the environmental conditions that contribute to addictions, the actual addiction, and the secondary effects of addiction. So we have to manage each of these things. So start with the first one. Yes. So at the core of any addiction, whether it's behavior addiction or a drug addiction, as we already heard Dr. Bhaskar speak about, poor executive functions. Some people like to refer to it as dopamine deficient brains, which craves for dopamine by doing activities that are rewarding. So we are talking about people who are bored, who therefore seek sensation, and they struggle to inhibit themselves. They act impulsively, take a lot of risks, and are easily distractible. So what is impulsivity? It's essentially doing something without quickly assessing a situation. So think of a small child standing on the road. He sees a nice on the opposite side of the road. He doesn't assess the risk. He doesn't assess the situation. He just straight away runs to it without understanding that a car may be crossing and it might seriously injure him. So he he does the behavior without assessing the situation. He fails to inhibit his motor action that is running. He makes a risky choice. And generally, when people are impulsive, they tend to accept small, immediate goals rather than large, delayed ones, which to them appear unpredictable. So they prefer small, immediate rewards rather than delayed big rewards. Okay. So when we talk about impulsivity and when we talk about executive functions, we generally think that we're talking about most adolescents here, isn't it? And it's probably true to a large extent. So this slide shows, just if you look at the brain, as we're moving from age 5 to age 20, our brain gradually matures. There's a lot of things happening, but this picture shows that the brain is getting pruned. Certain parts are getting pruned later than some others. So if you look at the lateral prefrontal cortex in this picture, this gets developed the last. So at age nearly at the end of adolescence, which pretty much means that most adolescents have poor executive functions because their lateral prefrontal cortex hasn't matured properly. So when we talk about poor executive functions, when we talk about impulsivity, we essentially talk about a lot of our adolescent population. However, a subset of this adolescent population has ADHD, which makes them even more vulnerable. So although the entire population of adolescents are vulnerable, someone who has ADHD is even more vulnerable. And that reflects in the fact that as compared to normal population, kids with ADHD will have delayed synaptogenesis and pruning in prefrontal cortex. So as expected, their executive functions will mature later than a typically developing child. We've already heard a lot of neurobiology, so I don't want to go on about this. But so apart from poor executive functions, there are a lot of other things happening as well. And one of the things that is part of executive function is trying to down-regulate certain things. So so what happens when we are doing something, when we're preparing for something, and if there's an emotional dimension to the task, it boosts. So what happens, we might work slightly better to an extent, And if we feel that the emotion is overwhelming, the prefrontal cortex will inhibit that emotional dimension to the task. So practically means that, for example, when we are studying for an exam, we get anxious. A little bit of anxiety helps us, but when we get too anxious, we have to inhibit that anxiety to work properly. However, in ADHD, this downregulation doesn't happen effectively. So when someone gets angry while doing a task, instead of downregulating that anger, the prefrontal cortex doesn't act that well, and the person is more likely to act on that anger. So that effective response gets exacerbated by poor downregulation by the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so it looks like we're talking about adolescents, and in particular talking about ADHD. Despite that, we find that they're still able to focus on computer games, although they cannot focus for more than a few minutes on their studies or a lot of other mundane day-to-day activities. So what makes it easier for them to focus on games? Just go through the slide. It's computer games provide a lot of stimulation, visual, auditory. It's multi-sensory stimulation. There's one-to-one focus. There's a lot of novelty and variety. So if we think of the behavior management principles of ADHD, we use a lot of these things. We advise parents to use multiple stimulus when teaching the child. On one-to-one basis, make the task exciting and give a lot of feedback. So essentially, the computer game does what we want a parent to do when they're managing their ADHD child. I'm not promoting computer games, just telling the sort of thing that makes it easier for them to focus on computer games. So we talked about low dopamine levels in ADHD. So this slide just depicts that. So the first slide on your left, it shows that as compared to controls, so the dotted line is the dotted line is controls and the solid line is ADHD. So as compared to controls, ADHD kids have lower levels of tonic dopamine. So that is the basal dopamine. However, the ADHD kids, when they do a task which is rewarding, the dopamine shoots very high, much higher than those of control kids. Essentially, although the ADHD kids have low dopamine levels in the brain, the response of dopamine to something exciting is much more than compared to controls, which makes it more likely for them to do that stimulating task again and again. So computer games or any other addiction probably does that to the dopamine. It drives it from a low basal level to a high phasic level. Right. So we were talking about vulnerability. We talked about one aspect of vulnerability, that is ADHD, impulsivity. The other vulnerabilities as well. So someone who's oversensitive as a child, has low social competence, poor self-esteem, who's very anxious, has poor emotional vocabulary. So we're talking about a lot of anxiety and depressive disorders. So these children may struggle in their day-to-day life. These children may have poor coping mechanisms. And to deal with their anxiety, to deal with their daily rejection, to deal with their low self-esteem, they become more likely to find some pleasure in computer games and even social media. So while the ADHD group is more likely to engage in gaming, this group will engage in both gaming and a lot of social media use that we see nowadays. And there's some studies to say that early exposure to potentially traumatic events before the age of 3 years, before the age of 11 years, actually increases the risk of addiction, probably through these lines, by making them more anxious and depressed during their growing up phase. Okay, so why I talked about this? Because unless we recognize the vulnerability, which is ADHD, impulsivity, anxiety, and depression, we cannot plan their management. So we cannot treat a behavior addiction in its isolation. The behavior addiction is just a manifestation of this vulnerability. That if we don't have the vulnerability, probably a child will not develop behavior addiction. That's one aspect. So the second aspect is the environmental conditions that contribute to addiction. So obviously, someone has to be vulnerable, but environment also has a lot of role to play here. I'll explain why. So we talked about the vulnerable population. It's not just someone with ADHD, it's the entire adolescent population who hasn't developed their prefrontal cortex to the extent that you would want them to. So essentially, any adolescent is more vulnerable to any behavior addiction because their top-down control isn't working as yet. So while easy availability to an adult might not make them an addict, easy availability of something addictive to an adolescent is more likely to make him or her an addict to that particular thing, to that process, to that smartphone, to social media, to an internet game, anything. So the earlier the exposure, the worse it is. Besides, we also know that if there's early exposure to these things the effects on an undeveloped prefrontal cortex. So we heard Dr. Bhaskar talk about that once the addiction sets in, it has epigenetic changes which might further have bad effects on the developing brain. So early exposure might actually make your executive functions worse if you become addicted. So easy availability, early exposure, and then poor parental supervision. So we're talking about parents who may not be available due to any reason. They may be busy. They may have psychiatric, drug or alcohol problems. They may be too busy with their jobs. They struggle to supervise the children, and they might use mobile phone as a proxy parent. Such kids are more likely to become addict because that's the main thing that constitutes their environment. So it's important to realize the environmental conditions that increase the risk. It acts through the vulnerability, but we have to remember pretty much any adolescent is vulnerable. So while we focus on the vulnerability, we also focus on the environmental issues, that is parenting, that is psychiatric problems in family members, so drug or alcohol or psychiatric problem which may predispose to poor parenting, and of course schooling. Schooling along with parenting forms one of the most important environmental conditions that kids are exposed to. Okay, we talked about vulnerability in the scheme of management. We talked about the environmental conditions. Now coming to the actual addiction. We already heard Dr. Lenin and Dr. Rachna talk about the impacts of smartphone addiction, increase in smartphone addiction in the COVID times. Before we talk about the actual object of addiction, we have to understand, is it internet addiction or smartphone addiction in general, or is it the content of the addiction that one is addicted to? So essentially, are you addicted to the bottle or to the whiskey? I would argue it's pretty much both, a bit of both. So I love my Lefroy much more than I prefer another brand of whiskey, for example, 8 p.m. And it's not just the quality of whiskey. I also love the bottle of Lefroy. So thinking about that bottle generates some reward anticipation in me. So that is cue related reward anticipation. So we don't get that high just by the substance or the process, but also the cues around it. So clearly, internet, smartphone in itself can become the object of addiction and not just the content. However, content is extremely, extremely important. So gaming, so internet gaming is already formed part of the preliminary. I mean, it's not in the main DSM-5, but it's part of the categories which they would research in future. So it comes in DSM-5 as a preliminary category. Gambling is already there. And shopping, social media, sexual addictions. We also have to remember that a lot of internet use may be for work and education, especially in the recent COVID times. And that doesn't necessarily come under the rubric of abuse or addiction. So it has to be a problem use, a non-essential use. Okay. Coming to online gaming, a lot of online gamers have a clear gaming preference, which different games provide. So it may be the physiological high, the dopamine kick that they receive. It may be skill development. We now know that gaming can be a professional option as well. So there are gamers who can earn a lot. There's an Indian Premier Gaming League, I'm told. So they get that sense of achievement. Some online games can go on and on. It's almost like a virtual world. It's a parallel virtual world. That game doesn't end. So these games can be extremely immersive. So it provides the gamer with a lot of outlets. It helps. I mean, it gives an outlet for the imagination. It gives an alternative world to them if they want to escape from the real world situation. It gives them a sense of control. Well, not necessarily, but some who are very good might feel that they have a sense of control. They escape from their real world problems, and for some, it may be just recreation. We have to understand the motives of the gamer before we try to help them. Okay. These are the criteria for addiction, which I'll skip. Already been talked about by Dr. Lennon in detail. Okay. So a part of management also should include an accurate assessment of the amount of usage. So there are a lot of apps which you can get on both Android and other platforms like Stay Free, Take Control. So these apps, your phone apps, they can monitor your use, your pattern of use, the duration, the frequency. And this gives a very accurate, honest feedback to the person who might otherwise deny that they are addicted to smartphone. The first step in treatment is to help them understand that their pattern of use is really problematic and they need to cut it down. There's a lot of commonly used tests. So one of the most commonly used is Young's Internet Addiction Test. There are numerous others. So it has a list of questions like these, and at the end of it gives you a score. So the lower the score, the less addiction you have. The higher the score, the higher addiction you have. So it gives them some honest assessment feedback about the level of usage they are doing. So these questionnaires, along with some apps, is a good starting point to help them realize that they are a problem user. Okay, we talked about impulsivity earlier. So why we're talking about it again? We heard Dr. Bhaskar already say that these are impulsive compulsive disorders. Essentially, while some of these process addictions start with impulsivity, which is pursuing a reward without assessing it, being distractible, trying a lot of things, increased risk taking. Gradually, it moves from impulsivity to compulsivity. So what happens? The behavior itself may not provide the reward it used to provide initially. However, it is still sustained because it is motivated by the avoidance of withdrawal symptoms and craving. And then the cue related craving also comes in. We talked about the bottle and the whiskey. So where the bottle acts as a cue, the smartphone acts as a cue. Sitting in a room acts as a cue. Sitting in the toilet for hours acts as a cue, which motivates that behavior. So over time, these learning mechanisms become overtrained through a lot of complicated neurobiology. It moves from impulsivity to compulsivity. So what happens? I can hear an echo of my. Sorry. Right. So as we move from impulsivity to compulsivity, we have to see that it's on a spectrum. There's some differences. So impulsivity is driven by that want for the reward, whereas compulsivity is driven by a habit which becomes overtrained with time. However, there's some similarity, as in both cases, in impulsivity and compulsivity, there's a failure of response inhibition. In both cases, the prefrontal cortex or other parts of the higher cortical systems, they fail to inhibit that response, whether it's the impulse or it's the compulsion. So we can see it on a spectrum of compulsive, impulsive disorders, this process addiction, the behavior addiction. Okay, so we talked about vulnerability, we talked about environmental issues, we talked about the actual addiction. So when we're talking about the actual addiction, we have to manage the compulsive, impulsive phenomena, the withdrawal, the craving, the secondary anxiety and depressive symptoms. So while anxiety, depressive symptoms are also a vulnerability factor, they can also result from the actual addiction because of the craving when the person tries to decrease or cut down the use. The part of management also involves dealing with the withdrawal by introducing alternative interests. So, for example, exercise would help in improving neuroplasticity. So we make use of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, especially in childhood and adolescence. A lot of our neuroplasticity is dependent on our experience. Okay, so we've talked about the first three: pre-existing vulnerability, environmental conditions, actual addiction. Coming to the last part of my talk, the secondary effects of addiction: the physical, psychiatric, and the exploitation. We've heard a little bit of this from the previous speaker, so I'm not going to repeat it. There are lots of physical problems that come up with addiction, including these. I've had some of my patients who have actually neglected their eating quite significantly, who haven't left their rooms in months because they stay awake all the night on the smartphone, on the games, and sleep in the daytime. So these things increase the risk of infections and vitamin deficiencies also. Then there's a risk of disturbed circadian rhythm, self-neglect. These kids avoid routine activities. It can cause both obesity and weight loss, depending how they're coping overall. Often it leads to oppositional behavior, relationship troubles, social isolation, academic failure, secondary depression, and more serious addictions in future, like alcohol and drug-induced cannabis. So when we're talking about managing behavior addiction, we have to look into all of these to manage them. And of course, the secondary risk of being bullied or bullying other people in social media, disclosing personal information that can be misused, accessing inappropriate, often sexual stuff on internet, and resulting sexual exploitation. So there are a lot of things that have to be kept in mind when we think about managing someone with behavior addiction. Okay, clearly, abstinence is not possible here, and no one recommends abstinence. Internet use, smartphone use has become a part of our lives. So harm reduction approach has to be followed further. So this slide just summarizes what we have talked about. So it's this existing vulnerability to addictions. You get exposed to environmental stress, so you are that makes you anxious. You want to escape that stress by indulging in gaming or social media, or you try smartphones and internet games, and you get hooked onto the reward. Gradually, addiction sets in, which is sustained by both escape and reward, and this leads to secondary physical, psychiatric, and exploitation risk. We have to manage pretty much all of these things when we manage behavior addictions. Okay, so I think it should be pretty obvious by now that rather than managing just behavior addiction, we're also managing ADHD, we're managing impulsive, compulsive symptoms, we're managing oppositional defiant disorder symptoms, conduct disorder symptoms, which often come secondary with ADHD, and often get exaggerated because the relationship between parents and child breaks down when they try hard to control the child's internet use. We're also managing a lot of internalizing disorders, which are both a vulnerability factor and get worse secondary to the addiction itself, including obsessive compulsive disorder. So because addiction being a compulsive phenomena, partly obsessive compulsive disorders have to be looked in. We're also managing poor supervision from parents. So we're managing their parenting things, schooling. We're managing withdrawal and craving after controlling problem behavior, and we are managing risk of other addictions. So there are a lot of things that we are trying to manage, not just the actual addiction. This is just to show that similar things have been found in a lot of studies. So this particular review found that almost 100% of studies looking at internet addiction showed symptoms of ADHD. So ADHD is pretty much a front runner when it comes to such behavior addictions. However, the evidence level is poor. We hardly have any tested treatments to manage these disorders. There's very little data on internet addiction. There's more data on internet gaming disorder, but still limited. So it talks about ADHD medications, methylphenidate better than atomoxetine to manage the vulnerability factor ADHD. Bupropion is promising. Again, it partly helps ADHD and partly helps the anxiety, so partly helps the depressive symptoms. SSRIs, including escitalopram, can help the impulsive phenomena. They can help the compulsive phenomena, but they have limited data. They may be superior, SSRI may be superior when there's comorbid depression, anxiety, and OCD. CBT has found to be very promising, but again, no RCT. And there's limited data on other family-based or other psychosocial treatments. So going by evidence, it becomes very difficult to plan someone's treatment. However, we have to understand the whole process and then manage it on a case-by-case basis. There's some evidence for other drugs, which Dr. Bhaskar touched on. Based on research from gambling disorder and kleptomania, drugs acting on the opioid system like naltrexone may be helpful. glutamate modulating drugs like topiramate, memantine, and N-acetylcysteine may be helpful. However, there is hardly any evidence. For managing the deranged poor circadian rhythm secondary to behavior addiction, melatonin can be extremely helpful. So that's so we talked about the pharmacological treatment options. We talked a little bit about parenting. We're going to we have a session tomorrow on parenting by Dr. Shekhar Seshadri. So I'm not going to touch on that further. We also have a session on behavior disorders tomorrow. Behavior approaches for addiction tomorrow. So I'll just briefly talk about the CBT approaches here. So it's the recommended initial treatment. Generally speaking, behavior approaches are better for younger children and cognitive approaches better for older children. And CBT needs to target both the addiction part and the other psychiatric symptoms. There's some behavior part and some cognitive part. Although there's a clear distinction on the screen, it's not really that distinct. So a lot of behavioral aspects of CBT also improve the cognitive aspects. So for example, someone who denies excessive use, when you make them, so this behavior of recording their use might help you challenge their belief, that is, help them from a cognitive point of view that they're not addicted. So you get a record of the use, that's a behavior, and then you challenge their cognition, which is they challenge the cognition that they're using it excessively. So that becomes the cognitive aspect of CBT. A lot of other behaviors which we can use as part of CBT, the activity scheduling. So reminding them of other behaviors to do, removing apps. Similarly, on the cognitive side of things, it really depends on the person's distorted cognitions, which makes them more likely to engage in these behaviors. So a person might say that I'm only good at gaming. I'm poor at everything else in real life. I'm poor in academics. No one likes me. Everyone judges me in real life. Only no one judges me on Facebook. So they might have these distorted cognitions, which have to be dealt in CBT. Just a type of formulation that someone can come up with when they're dealing, when they're doing CBT. So this formulation has some triggers, generating some negative automatic thoughts, feeling of anxiety and physical sensation, and the safety-seeking behavior. So let's see how we can apply this to some of the problem behaviors in process addiction. So someone who has anxiety symptoms, someone who has a lot of anxiety and depressive symptoms, they might have a belief that people don't like me. So a trigger could be that this adolescent's mother says that you don't do any work, you're poor at studies. So this trigger might trigger that. So this trigger might generate the next thought that I'm bad at everything. The only thing that I'm good at is social media, where people admire me. The thought that people don't like me might generate feelings of anxiety and physical sensations of anxiety. And the safety-seeking behavior automatically is going on the Facebook again. So that may be one way of seeing smartphone use or social media use secondary to anxiety. Similarly, formulations can be, we can make formulations for pretty much any aspect of smartphone addiction, depending on what the triggers are and what the thoughts it generates. The CBT has been found to be helpful. For someone who has a lot of emotional regulation issues, CBT can be clubbed with emotional regulation. So that essentially becomes DBT, which is a modification of CBT. It includes emotional regulation sessions, increasing stress tolerance, and mindfulness. DBT has been tried. Again, there's no evidence for internet addiction because it's a preliminary thing. But DBT should be helpful for any process addiction. I think that's pretty much my talk. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, hello.
Hello.
I am audible to you.
Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Kshitij Srivastava. because of the technical snag, no, I enter a little late. Huh? But you have presented a wonderful, topic very elaborately regarding the smartphone addiction overview of management. So there are 2-3 questions from the audience. The first question is adolescents are that going for addiction. How to convince them the fact? Can
Okay,
you?
so I think I already tried to address that briefly in my talk. So the first step is to making them aware that they might be getting addicted. So there's some apps which you can download and you can use it to monitor their use. So that gives them direct feedback on the pattern of use. And then there's some questionnaires which are pretty straightforward and gives them an idea. It generates a score. So there's one way of making them understand that this is a problem use.
Yeah, this question came from Jay Prakash. Jay Prakash, are you satisfied? Now I am coming to you a second question.
I just want to add there that when parents bring their child to us, their focus is mainly on the child's excessive use of smartphone or internet or game. Sometimes, as clinician, we want to shift focus slightly. We want to take the side of child, see what is the vulnerability that is making him susceptible to that use. So I covered that in overall management overview. So unless we assess that this person is vulnerable, the smartphone use is not in his control because of his vulnerability, we may not be able to break that in his parents' mind that the child is doing it only because he's a naughty child. Sometimes they think that, and they think that it's all in his control. We have to break that myth, deconstruct it, tell the parents that this is why your child is addicted, and we have to treat a lot of things systematically. Similarly, when we approach the adolescent, we have to try and focus on other things. So we focus on a lot of other strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, a lot of these kids may be failing in academics. We have to see does that bother the child? Maybe you can use that as a starting point. Or it could be something else that the child could be bothered about, and use that as a starting point to motivate him.
Yeah. So, Prakash, are you satisfied? I think you are satisfied. The second question is poorly developed control in adolescence. It is duty of parents to control them. Does it justify?
When we say that it's duty of parents to control them, I mean, parents are not their prefrontal cortex. So parents cannot control them directly. And controlling them directly often leads to a lot of conflicts between them. So what I tell the parents of these kids is don't tell your child what to do. Give your child inputs and let him decide what he should do. And that will serve him better in the long run. So not directly controlling, but helping him take control of his life himself.
That means we can inspire him, and determination should be taken by him.
So what I really meant is that I want to teach the parents to stop that controlling behavior by telling him you should do this, you should not do this. Instead, they should give reasons why this person should engage in certain behaviors and let the person take decisions himself. A lot of these conflicts are expected at this age anyway, in adolescence. So it's not that, I mean, most parents who have adolescent kids will have these fights in their homes. So we have to reassure them.
This question came from Jitendra Nanawala. He is having another third question. Any real life advice to prevent harmful exposure of sexual contents on internet?
I think you're talking in relation to very young age kids who access internet. There are a lot of practical things one can do. So what I would advise is try to use the TV screen or a laptop, which is easily visible to others. So smartphone is more likely to become secretive. So a kid can take smartphone to the toilet and access these sites. Make it, these internets should be ideally accessed on laptop or a smart TV if possible. Secondly, there are options to restrict certain sites on your phone. So if you give your phone to your child, you can block certain sites. You can speak. I mean, if you're not sure, you can speak to your service provider and see how you can impose some parental control on these things. The best treatment is prevention. So you don't want them to access such inappropriate sites early on in development.
So this much question can be answered. We cannot take up any more questions because we are overhead of time. So lastly, I thank Dr. Kshitij Srivastava, who is the Secretary General ICAM for the current year. So you have presented a wonderful, presentation elaborately, and I thank all the organizers of the ICAM team and Dr. Mona also for inviting me, and I really thank to my co-chair Devsis Corner, and I invite him to give few comments. Dr. Corner, Devsis Corner.
Yes. What I like best about the presentation, that it was very practical, and the day-to-day we can master these in our clinic. And thank you, Kshitij. And I thank Dr. Hiramani Singh for asking me to comment. These are the things we keep in our today work in our mind and try to practice. Thank you.
Before we finish, can I just make a request to people who are listening to me? The very exciting sessions tomorrow, so make sure you do log in. And we also have a very exciting quiz and a panel discussion, which I promise, will be very fruitful. And
there is a very good prizes for the PG students.
Yes.
That is
Beautiful prizes.
definitely the temptation.
Yeah.
I thank everyone. I congratulate the speaker for his extremely enthusiastic and useful presentation. I also thank the chairpersons who were enthusiastically making notes till the very end, and all the participants who enthusiastically posed questions till the end of the session. Am I audible?
Yes, audible. Yes.
With these interesting deliberations, we have come to
Yes.
end the first National Midterm CME 2020 of ICAM, Day 1.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.